Good evening, and to our friends in Japan, ohayou gozaimasu. Welcome to Japan America Society of Washington, D.C.'s 34th Annual US-Japan Capital Gala. I am Randy Yoshimura of the Sumitomo Corporation of Americas, joined by Andy Seidel, Dynamic Strategies Asia. We are trustees of the Japan America Society of Washington, D.C., and this year we have the distinct honor of serving as co-chairs of the gala event. Over the next 2 hours, we will be with you on our Hop-In platform, bringing you a mix of live content and messages that have been sent to us in advance by friends of the Society. Most of this is listed in the gala program and agenda that you can find posted in the event reception area where you just were. But we have a surprise or two in store for you as well. This year has been heavy in almost every way imaginable. So rather than another heavy event, we thought tonight we could instead focus on something joyous and uplifting, our wonderful bilateral relationship. We in Washington, D.C. are all accustomed to cerebral US-Japan policy programs. However, the US-Japan Capital Gala is first and foremost a celebration. We want you all to enjoy yourselves and hopefully enjoy reconnecting with friends, old and new. But this indeed being Washington, we would be remiss if we did not deliver a bit of high quality analytical content as well. It's just impossible to resist.
First, a few logistical notes. For the next hour, you will be with us here at the main stage of our Hop-In platform. We realize that most of you are not very familiar with Hop-In. You can navigate through the event using the icons on the left side of your screen. If you exit the stage area by clicking on any of these icons, you can come back at any time by clicking the Gala Stage icon. If you need help, you can find our virtual help desks by clicking on the Help Desk and Tables icon. The help desks will be staffed throughout the event. If you log out of the event platform and need help logging back in, please contact info@jaswdc.org. One more time, that is info@jaswdc.org. For those of you who are not yet participating in our Gala silent auction, there's nothing left, so please don't even bother logging in. No, just kidding. Please do take a moment to register. We have wonderful items available for you to enjoy. You can find the link in the gala instructions that are posted in the reception area, which you can access by clicking the reception button. The auction has been open for a little over a week. It will close tonight at 9:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Standard Time, 30 minutes after the event concludes. Through the gala, though the gala itself concludes at 9 p.m., our virtual dining rooms and the rest of the gala platform will remain open to all of you, and we invite you to remain and continue catching up with old friends, watch the auction results, and compliment the wonderful job done by our co-chairs.
The US-Japan Capital Gala event serves two important purposes. As Ambassador Kato was fond of saying, the bilateral relationship is like a beautiful garden. But like any garden, it requires constant tending. The gala is one of the annual events that tends the garden by bringing together on one occasion many of the specialists, officials, and enthusiasts that steward the very special friendship here in our capital city. While we are disappointed that COVID-19 keeps us physically distant this year, we are also delighted to announce that for the first time ever, the gala is welcoming to DC friends from all over the world. A bit later in the program, we will have a live conversation between Governor Yuriko Koike, who will join us live from her office in Tokyo, and Ambassador Kennedy, who will participate from New York. We will hear from Senator-elect Bill Hagerty from his home in Tennessee, the volunteer state. For our many guests joining the program from Japan, we are pleased to be able to bring you some of Washington, D.C.'s top US-Japan experts, like Ambassador Shinsuke Sugiyama, Sheila Smith, Kurt Campbell, Wendy Cutler, Jake Schlesinger, and our own Jim Zumwalt. We also have friends joining from Hanoi, Perth, Dallas, San Francisco, Boston, and beyond. Have a look in the event chat feature of Hopin, and I will bet you will find an old friend to connect with on this special occasion. The gala is also intended to celebrate the young and mid-career professionals who represent the future of this relationship. Later this evening, our society will present our John and Hiroko Malott Award to an individual and an organization whose contributions give us reason for great confidence in the bright future of this vibrant relationship. And on this score, keep your eyes out for an exciting announcement from the Society's president, Ryan Shaffer.
Our US-Japan Capital Gala is also a key source of support for the activities of the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C. Since we were first established in 1957 by diplomats from the United States Department of State and Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we've served as the anchor of grassroots ties in the national capital region, providing Japanese cultural and intellectual opportunities to our friends and neighbors in the community. Among the hundreds of events we hold every year, we host the largest and longest standing Japanese language school in our region. We are indeed home to the National Japan Bowl Japanese Language and Culture Competition, and our society hosts what in a typical year is the largest single-day Japanese cultural event in the country, the Sakura Matsuri Japanese Street Festival. This is a much-loved rite of spring in our city. 40,000 citizens come together annually to celebrate the US-Japan friendship and commune with our legendary cherry trees, a gift from the mayor of Tokyo over 100 years ago.
On behalf of all our colleagues at the Society, we would like to express our sincere thanks and gratitude to tonight's many generous sponsors, including our Tsubaki level sponsors, Mitsubishi Corporation, S&R Foundation, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and Stellus, and to our generous auction donors and event partners. And a very special thank you also to our Society's corporate members, including our Yokozuna level members, Panasonic, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Astellas, and ANA, and to all of our members. Without your loyal support and friendship, none of our programming would be possible.
This has truly been an extraordinary year in every way, one that has caused us to have to make difficult, sometimes unprecedented decisions. As many of you know, the Society was forced to cancel this year's Sakura Matsuri Japanese Street Festival. With disappointment, tonight Randy and I can share with you that the Society has decided to postpone the 2021 Sakura Matsuri as well. We look forward to 2022, when hopefully we can host the best Matsuri yet. All of this makes tonight's event even more special and important. No two cities in our two great countries have come to symbolize this enduring relationship and its vital importance and its tremendous potential for the future than Washington, D.C. and Tokyo. These two great cities have long shared a very special tie, and the cherry trees are but one spectacular reminder of the depth of that mutual affection. We're greatly honored and pleased to be able to open this evening with a very special message from the Honorable Muriel Bowser, Mayor of the District of Columbia. Dozo otanoshimi kudasai.
Please enjoy the program.
Good evening. I'm Muriel Bowser, Mayor of Washington, D.C. Although we cannot be together in person, I am honored to join you tonight along with Tokyo's Governor Koike, Ambassador Sugiyama, and other distinguished friends from the District Tokyo and around the world. I want to thank the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., including the trustees and staff, for their hard work in supporting the rich friendship between our nations and our cities. DC is proud to host our beloved National Cherry Blossom Festival, and we look forward to welcoming you back next year. I hope you all enjoy this year's US-Japan Capital Gala. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Bowser, for the very kind words and for your strong support of our Sakura Matsuri Japanese Street Festival and the broader National Cherry Blossom Festival. I'm Ryan Shaffer, President of Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. In a moment, I'm honored to be able to welcome another great friend of our society and to our peer Japan America societies around the country, Ambassador Shinsuke J. Sugiyama. Before I do, I'd like to thank our gala chairmen and expand a bit on what they said to note why it is that we invest as much as we do in the civil society ties that bind the US-Japan together. And that is the broader context is that this is a bilateral relationship that's an invaluable foreign policy asset to the United States. We benefit from knowing that our partnership with Japan serves as a bulwark and a global model for democratic norms that we share. We benefit from a security alliance that enables our forward deployed presence that defends these values. And we benefit from an immense flow of trade and investment between our two countries. As our city is the seat of US government and primary host to Japan's diplomatic delegation, the ability of our region to display and embody the vibrance of this bilateral relationship takes on special importance. And to that end, I round back on Mayor Bowser's comments and how deeply important and meaningful her support is. Having all of you with us, and as I look down the list of participants of the gala, including such an incredible gathering of friends, managers, past, present, and future of the US-Japan relationship, I'm all the more proud and excited to be able to share with you our latest initiative, and that is a high school scholarship that will inaugurate this coming fall, which will send a high school student from our region, somebody who demonstrates need and the rich diversity of our country, to Japan for a high school year abroad. Several generous donors have provided seed money for this effort, and I look forward to working with our community to sustain this effort into the future. With that, it's my great privilege to welcome Ambassador Shinsuke J. Sugiyama for the opening toast for tonight's dinner. If you have a beverage in front of you, please ready it now. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being here, and thanks for the incredible support from you and the embassy for the gala, but for our events all throughout the year. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to you all. As we meet virtually for this dinner, I can't help but think back to the 2019 Sakura Matsuri Street Festival and all the people and food and music and cultural activities. All of us miss that life. Though my wife Yuriko was called by the Lord in February this year, we were able to attend Sakura Matsuri twice last year and one before. We were always surprised and delighted by how popular the event has become and how much fun people have had. I mention this because the street festival occupies a special place in my heart for the memories it brings back to me. I know it was a hard decision for the society to postpone the festivities this year with the obvious reason. But I also know that all the goodwill and fun that everybody enjoyed will come back immediately at the next festival, no matter what shape it takes. The virtual dinner shows that people deeply believe in Japan, in the Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. Just look at the people who are participating tonight, as we already saw the address being made by Mayor Bowser, and later Ambassador Kennedy, Governor Koike, and Senator-elect Hagerty. Oh, Bill, congratulations, by the way, for your big election. Their presence says this dinner is important. The Japan American Society is even more important. And I think then and I thank them and all our guests for being part of this evening. I also want to thank Chairman Zumwalt and President Shaffer for their foresight in organizing this first ever virtual Capital Gala. What I've been telling virtual audiences is that while much has changed over the late 8 or 9 months, the most important things in the Japan-US relationship have not changed. Our friendship, our alliance, and our economic partnership. Our alliance has never been closer. I see evidence of it every day. Our economies have never been closer. Japan has surpassed the United Kingdom as the world's largest investor in the United States of America, $619 billion as of 2019. Our grassroots connections have also never been closer. For example, even in this difficult time, the Society's Digital Japan Ball attracted 20 times more viewers than the previous in-person ball. So, thank you to the Society for all you do in all kinds of ways to strengthen our relationship. Now, in closing, I would like to congratulate Mr. Gauntner, this year's recipient of the Marshall Green Award. Without his contributions, sake would not have the reach in the United States that it does. And so, it's so fitting that I make the following traditional Japanese toast with a glass of sake in my hand for you all, and in particular for Mr. Gauntner. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's say together, Kanpai!
Good evening, and thank you, Ambassador Sugiyama. I am Jim Zumwalt, the Chairman of the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C. Let me join Ryan in thanking you and your colleagues at the Embassy for your tremendous support for this society and also for our sister societies around the United States. It is my honor tonight to present the 2020 Marshall Green Award. This award was established in 2011 to recognize, and I quote, an individual or group that has made a sustained and significant contribution to strengthening relations between the United States and Japan and to increasing understanding between the American and Japanese people. You can read more about Marshall Green and about this award in tonight's program. This year, we decided to recognize John Gauntner for his tireless efforts to promote Japanese sake culture around the world. John has made important contributions to increasing the popularity and accessibility of Japanese sake to American consumers. Known as the Sake Guy, John has been writing and lecturing about sake since 1994. He wrote weekly columns on sake for the Japan Times and the Yomiuri Shimbun, and he has authored 6 books on sake. His most recent book, called Sake Confidential, is a guide to understanding, tasting, selecting, and enjoying Japanese sake. And so, for John's work to promote one of Japan's most delicious cultural exports to the United States, I am very pleased to present the 2020 Marshall Green Award to John Gauntner. Now, Mr. Gauntner is in his home in Kamakura, Japan this evening, and so I am unable to present the award in person. But let me share with you that this award is accompanied by a beautiful tea bowl which has been crafted by our friend, Master Potter Willie Singleton. Another of Mr. Singleton's creations is available on our silent auction this evening. So John, many thanks for your wonderful contributions to this important aspect of Japanese culture and for all of your efforts to promote understanding of Japanese sake culture in the United States. Congratulations on your on being the recipient of the Marshall Green Award in 2020.
Thank you, Ambassador Zumwalt, for that warm introduction. And good evening to everyone in attendance tonight. I would also like to thank Ryan and the trustees of the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C. Thanks as well as to Ambassador Sugiyama for getting things started with that wonderful toast, for which he used Izumibashi sake, brewed somewhat locally here to me in Kanagawa. I'll come back to that in a little while. To everyone in attendance tonight, it's wonderful to be able to join you all at this year's US-Japan Capital Gala, albeit virtually. And I'm also not only pleased, but sincerely honored to have been chosen for and to accept this year's Marshall Green Award. I did have a quick look at the list of past recipients, and I felt even more honored and just a little bit intimidated. I feel quite grateful indeed. Ambassador Zumwalt's reference to my work in sake culture and accessibility was very much appreciated, as that's exactly what my focus has been. The grades of sake, the rules and regulations that apply to those grades, how sake is made, these things are important. But more important is the culture that enjoying sake espouses. Every sip of sake is a journey back through over 1,000 years of history, yet at the same time, it's tied to an ever-evolving craft. Attention to detail and subtlety, which are two absolutely incredible aspects of Japanese culture, are both thoroughly conveyed through sake. Every single step of the process is imbued with great attention to detail that can only be achieved through experience and the intuition that it forges. And yet, almost all sake in the market is somewhat restrained in aromas and flavors, rather than being massive and overpowering and in your face. Based on this, I honestly believe that better cultural understanding can be achieved by everyone enjoying a little bit more sake. The culture that suffuses it is literally absorbed, and if we pay even a little bit of attention to that, we come to better and better mutual understanding. As such, while sake has a long history to it, it is perhaps better suited to the present than to any other time. Especially over the last 30 years or so, Japan and Japanese culture have occupied a very special place and become an integral part of the culture of the United States. Nowhere is this more clear, at least to me, and I admit that I might be somewhat biased, than with sake. We drink a lot of wine in the US, and over the last decade or so, a lot of consumers that enjoy wine are learning the joys of sake as well. And instrumental to that are the many wine professionals, sommeliers, that have really learned to embrace, enjoy, and appreciate sake. Such professionals, who interact with consumers more than anyone in the industry, are very influential and have done so much to help more people enjoy sake, and therefore Japan. So subtly, not overtly, but subtly, sake has worked its magic and had a big impact on US culture overall. One positive effect of all that impact is that it helps us to think about and reflect upon our own culture, which is in and of itself very important. One big indicator of all this is the fact that there are currently well over 20 craft sake breweries operating in the United States, owned and operated by local people, and in a couple of cases, Japanese people that have relocated to the United States. But the fact that they would feel such an affinity with sake that they would commit to starting local craft sake breweries shows just how familiar and comfortable people in the United States have become with Japan and Japanese culture. I'm sure that while the sake industry in the US will have some growing pains, it will continue to evolve and develop into an even more interesting industry. So be sure to seek and support your local sake brewery. Poke around. There's probably one that is closer to you than you might think. I would like to say a bit more about the sake that many of you have in front of you. Izumibashi Blue. The official name in Japan is Izumibashi Megumi Blue Label Junmai Ginjo. As I alluded to earlier, it's made in the same prefecture in which I live, Kanagawa, just below Tokyo, and within which sits Yokohama and the ancient capital of Kamakura, which is the city in which I live. But for all that history, Kanagawa is hardly a pillar of sake brewing. There are about 1,200 sake breweries in Japan now, but only 13 in Kanagawa. That number is one of the lowest in Japan. But nevertheless, there are a couple of very good and popular breweries, including Izumibashi. They're not too far from me, and in fact, I've been there twice already this brewing season. A little bit more about the sake itself. This manifestation of Izumibashi is a Junmai Ginjo, which means that the rice has been milled to a certain degree to remove fat and protein hovering around the outside portion of the grains. By doing that, you get a lighter, more refined flavor, and often a more aromatic sake as well. The flavor really represents the essence of all the sake made at Izumibashi, which is mellow and broad, mildly aromatic, rice-laden, and balanced. My own personal tasting notes, and yours may vary, included banana and raisins in the aromas, with a little bit of a buttery, nutty touch as well. These elements were noticeable in the flavor too, which had an earthy richness or umami and breadth that is typical of Yamada Nishiki rice. It tends to lean to the sweet side just a bit, but the nice acidity balances that to give you a drier finish and a drier overall impression. I'm sure it will dovetail nicely with a wide range of Western food. A bit more about the company. The current president took over in 1995 and really revamped everything about the company, including the type of sake they make, shifting it toward premium, as well as how they market that sake. He's increasingly shifted their production methods toward more traditional and labor-intensive methods, but he uses modern technology where it's most effective as well. For example, once a tank of sake has been fermented, they have to pass the contents of that tank through a mesh to filter out the rice solids and take out the sake. Usually a big machine does this, but at Izumibashi they use a traditional method in which the fermented mash is placed in cloth bags, which are then laid inside of a big box, and the lid is down cranked into that box, squeezing the sake out and leaving the rice solids behind in the bags. It leads to much more expressive sake, but it's much more of a hassle to do. Many breweries might do 1 or 2 tanks that way, but Izumibashi presses all of their sake using this method. On the other hand, they use a modern method of milling the rice called henpei seimai that removes more fat from the exact places on the outside of the rice grains where there is physically more fat to be milled away. Again, it's not that hard, it's just more of a hassle, but it's worth it for Izumibashi. More interesting, most expressive of the history and culture of sake that he grows in his own is that he grows his own rice. For many reasons beyond the scope of this evening's presentation, very few sake breweries can grow their own rice or even own their own rice fields. Izumibashi is one of like 20 that can, but perhaps only of 1 or 4 or 5 that actually do grow their own rice. Furthermore, the rice that he grows are strains of sake rice, which, by the way, is different from table rice, several of which, like the Yamada Nishiki rice used in this sake, are much more commonly grown in the western part of Japan, like Hyogo Prefecture, wherein sits Kobe. But his patience and diligence have paid off, and he grows very good Yamada Nishiki very close to the brewery. A bit about the sake industry in Japan. As good as it gets, it's been contracting since 1973, what with so many other types of alcoholic beverages available to consumers these days. But good sake is making a comeback these past few years, and the entire market is shifting towards premium. Sake exports have been growing very steadily for the last 20 years, but are still only about 6% of all sake brewed. The US is the biggest importer of sake from Japan, comprising about 25 to 30% of all exports. Viewed from the other end, sake imports to the United States have been growing at an average of about 10% a year for the last 20 years. Having said that, it's still like 1% of the wine market, and importers, distributors, and retailers still hesitate to take on too many sake products. So it can be somewhat challenging to find good sake in some areas. But things are getting better, and that improving accessibility is also part of my work, and I intend to continue to make efforts in that direction. So please, do enjoy the rest of your Izumibashi, and be sure to try other sake when you work your way through this bottle. Remember, by doing so, you are literally absorbing Japanese culture and furthering mutual understanding. And lastly, I would like again to thank everyone involved for the honor of receiving this year's Marshall Green Award. Everyone, please enjoy the rest of the evening. Keep safe and well. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to hand things back over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, John. That was brilliant, and congratulations once again. On the subject of distinguished guests, we heard earlier tonight from Mayor Muriel Bowser, and therefore it's all the more special to be joined by the chief executive of Japan's capital city, Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike. Having both leaders participate this evening helps underscore the really special relationship that our two cities share, and one that was immortalized over 100 years ago by Tokyo's gift of cherry trees to Washington, D.C. We're honored to also have with us tonight a beloved American leader in both the diplomatic and cultural spaces, and somebody who also truly requires no introduction, and that's United States Ambassador to Japan from 2013 to 2017, Caroline Kennedy. It's a pleasure to be able to turn to another person who's very well known to our attendees, and that's former acting Deputy United States Trade Representative Wendy Cutler, who was responsible for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement in our bilateral negotiations with Japan, as well as serving as chief negotiator to the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement. Ms. Cutler, who is one of our trustees, is now Vice President and Managing Director of the Washington, D.C. office of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Ms. Cutler will serve as moderator for an informal conversation, which aims to provide some perspective on this particular moment in which we find ourselves. The conversation is live, and if you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the chat bar on the right side of your screen, ensuring that you're in the stage chat, not the event chat. Please provide your name and affiliation and to whom you would like the question to be directed. Now, Wendy Cutler, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Ryan. And good evening to our friends in Japan. Excuse me, good evening to our friends in Washington and New York and around the country. And good morning to our friends in Japan. I'm Wendy Cutler, and it's really my honor to be moderating the discussion over the next 30 minutes between two impressive, groundbreaking, and highly regarded women, Ambassador Caroline Kennedy and Governor Yuriko Koike. I hope we can touch upon a range of issues over the next 30 minutes that will be of key interest to the audience, and at the same time, so let me start with an issue that I know it's on a lot of people's minds. We're going to be a little serious to begin with, and that is the issue of COVID and how it's affecting women all around the world. American and Japanese workers have been disproportionately impacted by COVID and the associated downturn in light of, their high participation in the service industries, their child care responsibilities, their child education responsibilities, as well as elder care responsibilities. So I would like to ask our two panelists, how can this impact be mitigated? And are there any bright spots we can look to with respect to how women can participate more in the workplace going forward? Governor Koike, I'd love to hear your response.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the US-Japan Capital Gala tonight. And good evening for the members of the Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. It's 9:30 in the morning in Tokyo, by the way. Tokyo and Washington, D.C., home to your society, have been deepening friendship ever since Tokyo presented Washington, D.C. with 3,000 cherry trees in 1912. So the National Cherry Blossom Festival is held to commemorate this gift. And I understand that the Sakura Matsuri, Sakura Festival, which is held by your society, is the festival's grand finale. But it's so sad that it had to be canceled this year due to COVID-19. But I'm happy to note that the festival is now a time-honored event. Thank you very much. So, may I start?
Please, yes, please do.
Okay. The question Wendy raised two big questions. First of all, women issue and the COVID. Now, Tokyo is a megacity, as you know, with a population of about only 14 million people. Although this is close to the 13 million residents of Pennsylvania. What's happening in Pennsylvania, by the way? the cumulative total, anyway, the total of positive coronavirus cases has been kept down to around 35,000 and the number of deaths to around 417, while the number of deaths is increasing 2 or 3 every day, unfortunately. Well, these figures are partially due to the high awareness of the Japanese about prevailing infection, and this includes frequent hand washing, the established use of masks, which dates back to the Spanish flu pandemic. This is a past poster of 100 years ago. A century ago, you see, so wearing a mask is a very popular or etiquette since then. And efforts to avoid the 3 C's. I'd like to show you this. 3 C's. 3 C's means closed spaces, crowded places, close conversation. These are very important keys to avoid the COVID-19. So I myself also deliver weekly messages in both Japanese and English, sometimes in Nepalese and Tagalog, on the infection situation and response. These videos can be watched on YouTube. Just like New York's Governor Cuomo. And last month, we opened a facility where people with light or no symptoms can stay with their pet, rabbit, dog, cats, and hamsters, until they recover. A great deal of women, by the way, work at hotels and restaurants under fixed-term employment contracts, but these workplaces are being forced to lay off many of their workers. I think the same thing is happening in the United States. We are preparing an environment where women can work with a sense of assurance. And this includes further promotion of stable employment and enrich of safety nets for women. And working from home is also a very effective way for women to balance work and family, such as parenting. And as for Japan and as for in Tokyo, last year, only about 25% of the companies in Tokyo had systems in place for remote work. But this has risen significantly this year to about 60%. And we are working to establish telecommuting by preparing satellite offices and promoting the advantage of remote work. So this is the current situation in Tokyo.
Well, thank you so much for your response, and we really applaud your personal efforts to address the COVID pandemic and to promote women in the workforce. Ambassador Kennedy, when you were ambassador, I know you spent a lot of time and attention on the whole issue of women in the workplace in Japan, and really tried to encourage women to step up and to be, greater participants in the Japanese workforce and society overall. When you look at this COVID crisis and what's happening at the workplace and all the burdens placed on women, do you see any bright spots going forward?
Governor Koike is a great inspiration to women in Japan, certainly, and women here in the United States. And here we have Senator Kamala Harris, who's been elected as the first woman vice president. So I think that we do see examples of people who we can look up to and who our children can look up to, and make them believe that it's possible for women to do anything they set their minds to. But it is true that our countries are not living up to their promises to women, and the pandemic has made that very, very clear. In Japan, as we all know, women do the most housework and childcare responsibilities, and have fewer benefits and less job security. But in the US, the situation turns out to be not so different. So we are struggling here as well, with women losing many more jobs than men, and therefore their lifetime earnings will suffer. So I think that as we look ahead, both government, like the governor described, and business need to really prioritize the reentry of women. And I think that technology will provide some solutions. It will allow more flexible time, which women have long been looking for. But in the US, we need to increase support for childcare education and job training, and certainly pay women the same amount as men. And for businesses, I think they really need to commit to helping women succeed, providing mentoring and on-ramps for women to stay and manage all the different complexities of their lives and their family responsibilities as well as their careers. Because really we're talking about not just the women in the workforce today, but their children and the next generation. And so if we want this suffering not to affect the next generation, we really need to make sure that women can re-enter the workforce and stay there despite the tragedies of this pandemic.
Well, thank you. And I really share the views of both of you that I really hope that this whole remote working will really benefit women in the future, because through my career, particularly working with Japanese officials in the ministries, they're there so late at night, including the women, and I never understood how they could have a family at the same time with so many pressures on them. Okay, now I'm going to change gears, Ambassador Kennedy, and I've got a question for you. You go way back with President-elect Biden, and if he hasn't already, I'm sure he's going to approach you and ask you for your input and views on the current state of the US-Japan bilateral relationship, but also how it can be strengthened during his tenure. What advice would you give him if indeed you have that conversation?
Well, the US has no more important ally than Japan. And I think that President-elect Biden knows that from his own experience as well as his long career. He took personal responsibility for the US-Japan relationship during much of the Obama administration and had regular calls with Prime Minister Abe, and he visited Japan numerous times. So he has already spoken to Prime Minister Suga and reaffirmed the United States security commitment, and that President Obama was the first to make, to include the Senkakus under the Security Treaty, Article 5. But President Biden, as president, will really, he said it many times on the campaign trail, and I think most recently today, he will work to make sure that America is re-engaged with the world, that we are not going it alone anymore, but that we are strengthening our partnerships and alliances. And certainly in the Indo-Pacific, that is more important than almost anywhere else in the world. So I have great confidence in a Biden administration, and I know that Japan will be a top priority. And I'm certain that President Biden and Prime Minister Suga will develop a very strong personal relationship, because they share a real commitment to working people, to ordinary citizens, to the issues that really affect people's lives, whether it's drug pricing or cell phone costs. So I think that there's a commitment to the alliance, and they both understand how well that is. I certainly saw that firsthand in my own dealings with Prime Minister Suga. So I think it's a wonderful time for us to have two new, experienced and deeply patriotic leaders.
That's great to hear. Governor Koike, let me turn to you and ask you a question now about the Tokyo Olympics. There's so much interest in the Olympics for this coming summer. And I understand, I think it was last week that the president of the IOC came to visit Tokyo to discuss preparations. So what can you share with us on the Olympics? What steps are you going to take to make sure that Tokyo is safe for the visitors and the athletes? And what else can you share with us with respect to the preparations?
Well, may I say something before responding to your question about Tokyo 2020 Games? I'd like to send a congratulatory message to Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect, for her very successful start. I mean, as a very first female vice president in the United States. I am the first female governor of Tokyo, but I won't be the last. So we are very, Japanese women were very much inspired by her success as a vice president elect, and also Caroline. Thank you very much for your such a wonderful activities as an ambassador to Tokyo, as an American ambassador to Tokyo. You inspired us quite a lot. Your presence, your activities stimulated us. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. That's so nice.
So, talking about the Tokyo 2020 Games, the Tokyo 2020 Games provide enormous hope for athletes and children. And it will also serve as a symbol of humankind bonding even more strongly through united efforts to overcome COVID-19. We are steadily advancing preparations for the Games, and these include having those involved with the Games meeting together to discuss measures that must be implemented for the safe operation of the Games, such as regularly conducted PCR tests on the athletes. And the other day, I met with IOC President. Yesterday, the day before. The day before yesterday. Okay. The other day, I met with IOC President Bach, and we confirmed our determination to hold a safe Games. And recently, an international gymnastic competition was also held successfully with 2,000 spectators, and Japan, the United States, Russia, and China. Those athletes participated in this competition, and it was well done without any problem so far. And this was the first time an international event for an Olympic sport has been held in Japan since the coronavirus pandemic. So we are taking steady steps toward the 2020 Games. And following Tokyo, Paris will host the Games in 2024, and then Los Angeles in 2028. And we will create a new model that benefits the post-COVID world. And I wish to pass this on these two cities.
Well, thank you very much. As I say, I know there's a lot of interest in these games. Do you have a start date? When will the Olympics begin?
July 23rd.
Okay, that's coming up. Very exciting. Maybe a question for both of you. You've both have alluded to the challenges presented by COVID and maybe future health incidents. We also know that climate change is on the agenda, and we've seen weather incidents in both of our countries. How can the US and Japan work through these challenges, and how can we work together to kind of share our experiences and our leadership with the rest of the world? Ambassador Kennedy, maybe I can ask you to take that question first.
Well, I think Japan and the United States are uniquely positioned to address these coming global challenges because these are issues that no country can solve alone. And the United States has had so many deep ties and strong economic partnerships with Japan, personal friendships, and really the most important, which is a shared commitment to our democratic values. And I think by working together through multilateral organizations like the UN or the WHO, through developing advanced technologies and distributing them to other countries, and we can really help to lead the world and benefit the millions of people that we have helped already to rise out of poverty. But I think that in the 21st century, we can do more. And I think part of that is because Japan is ready to continue to play a greater role on the global stage. And I think that in the Asia Pacific region and Southeast Asia is going to be tremendously important. But we also need to make sure that we're investing for the long term, because it's because of our parents and grandparents who built this alliance and these relationships. And it's really important that students continue to come to both countries and study, that we invest in science and technology education and partnerships, so that the next generation will also benefit from this incredible alliance. And I think certainly everyone who gets to watch the Tokyo Olympics will become fascinated once again with Japan. And so Japan's global reach will be even more powerful, but I think it's a great opportunity for the US and Japan to take advantage of that and reach forward to new generations.
Yeah, Tokyo will certainly be on the world stage come this July. Governor Koike, maybe I can ask you the same question too. Do you think that the US and Japan can really work together and lead the world in addressing some of these global challenges which don't seem to be letting up and may become even more serious in the future?
Well, as you know, I served as a Minister of the Environment many years ago, and I started a campaign to change people's mindset to take off their jacket and neckties during the hot and humid summer days in Japan. And this campaign became more global campaign, and it was a kind of sort of a mindset which is necessary to change not only the people's mind, but also to stimulate the innovation, technological innovation, and change the systems and so forth. And so when I was a Minister of the Environment, Mr. Al Gore was the vice president at the time, and he made a great leadership. And Kyoto Protocol, which the United States unfortunately hadn't participated, but this kind of since the global warming or climate change cannot be done in one country, one nation. It's the matter of global issue. So we have to get together and work together against to fight not only coronavirus, but also this disastrous climate change. And last year, I chaired the U20 Mayor Summit, which was held in Tokyo. And along with other cities such as New York City, Los Angeles, and Houston, we issued a communique that including aiming for decarbonization by 2050 and proposed this to the G20. And we will continue to work closely with the cities of the United States and find solutions to challenge we share. And also talking once again about 2020 Tokyo Games, it's a sort of showcase. We're going to showcasing the new energy source, such as hydrogen, using the fuel cell cars, fuel cell bus for the use of for athletes, for moving athletes from the athlete village to the venue. And this kind of thing. So we have many new technologies and new source of energy. So this is the time to share our experience and know-hows in order to fight the common issue that is climate change. Also, importantly, using the power of financial power to innovate or to push the environmental technologies forward. And green bonds that City of Tokyo has started to issue every year. 300億円ってなんていう
30 billion. 30 billion yen.
About 30 billion yen annually issued and bought out and sold out only a day. So people's mind and also companies' mind are now changing toward more eco-friendly and to tackle climate change not in the business field as well. This is a good move.
Well, thank you very much. I know we're running out of time. I wanted to have one more question for Ambassador Kennedy. We have a question from the audience kind of about soft power. And in other words, what role do kind of educational exchanges and cultural exchanges play, not only strengthening US-Japan relations, but just more broadly in the world? I know that you have some projects that you worked on when you were in Tokyo that you've continued working on since you've been home. And so maybe you can share with us and really help us understand the important role these kind of people-to-people exchanges, student-to-student exchanges play in strengthening relations.
Well, I think that organizations like the Japan-America Society do this kind of work, and it's really important over the long term because while people are often focused on the national security issues and the economic relationships, we need to sustain these alliances and understand each other in order to work well together and solve the kinds of problems and challenges that Governor Koike was outlining. And the earlier that we get to know each other, that kids get to study and learn from each other, that they understand different cultures and how they work differently, the better we'll be able to address these problems. And now there's nothing like a personal experience. Obviously, we have tremendous advantages with technology and we can get to know each other in new ways, but they're not as, I'd say if long-term investment is very high, and it's a hard time in the world. People are scared between COVID or a lot of uncertainty in the world, and students may not want to leave home or travel. But I think what you find when you do travel is that you learn so much and that people are so welcoming and really want to learn from each other and work together. And certainly that's what the Olympics symbolizes more than anything. So, and I know that Japan and Tokyo will do just a spectacular job. And then hopefully everyone will want to come to Japan, but we also need Japanese students to come to the US. So for anybody who's involved with a company or an organization who's watching, I hope that you won't forget about this long-term investment, because we've benefited from the investments that our parents and grandparents and those who came before us have made to bring us to this point. And I think it's exciting to be able to pay it forward. And kids really just love to meet each other.
Yeah. And not only in person, because I think we're all getting used to this new world, not only in Zoom, but all these different platforms. And the fact that we can be having this conversation tonight from Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., and Tokyo is a real testament to, the endless boundaries of communication. So with that, I'm going just to conclude this portion of this evening's event. My big thanks to Ambassador Kennedy, to Governor Koike, to our audience. I think this was a great discussion. We covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes. And now I'm told I need to turn it back to a special guest that's going to join us for this gala dinner tonight. Thanks again to everyone. I really appreciate it. It's been my honor to chair this panel.
Thank you very much.
ケネディ大使、小池知事、杉山大使、そして2020年日米キャピタルガラへのご出席の皆さん、ワシントン DC 日米協会へのご支援に誠にありがとうございます。日米友好のさらなる強化に乾杯をしたいと思います。それでは皆さん、準備はいいですか？乾杯!
Gala guests, this is Elise Smith with the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., with a couple of gala event announcements. I would like to remind you that the gala silent auction is now 1.5 hours from closing, so please, do keep an eye on your bids. For our local sponsor guests who are dining during the event, we invite you to click on the Help Desk and Tables button on the left-hand side of your screen to join a virtual dining room. There, you will also find our virtual help desks, where my colleagues and I are standing by in case you need any assistance. For those who depart the stage area, please reconvene here in 45 minutes at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the presentation of the John and Hiroko Malott Awards and our closing toast from Senator-elect Bill Hagerty. For those of you who wish to remain here in the main stage area, you are invited to participate in a live conversation between Dr. Sheila Smith and Dr. Kurt Campbell, moderated by Mr. Jake Schlesinger, senior correspondent in the Washington Bureau of the Wall Street Journal. Bon appetit to our dinner guests. For the rest of our guests, we turn now to Mr. Jake Schlesinger.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us for this virtual fireside chat. I hope that at least some of you have fires that you can be burning at home safely. I'm honored to be moderating this conversation between Dr. Sheila Smith, Senior Fellow for Japan Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and a premier expert on the Japanese military and US-Japan relations, and Dr. Kurt Campbell, currently Chairman and CEO of the Asia Group, who has a long and storied history in Asia policy in virtually every major arm of the executive branch, including the Treasury, the Pentagon, the White House, and the State Department. Actually, Ryan told me that I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to introduce our panelists because they are such familiar faces to our audience. In fact, Ryan described this segment to me as the comfort food portion of the evening. So I guess my first question as we set the table for the next 45 minutes is, Sheila and Kurt, what comfort food exactly do you consider yourself to be? Sheila?
Oh dear. So I thought we were thinking about which comfort food would we like the most. And
Either one.
I will tell you, Jake, that since I cannot travel to Japan, and as you know, I have a lovely homestay family that I've known for decades there. It's my okachan's harumaki, the spring rolls made by my oba-chan, who is now 96 years old, in Sugamo, Tokyo, that I miss the most.
Kurt, do you want to volunteer something?
Yeah, Jake, for me, it would have to be braised or grilled unagi over a nice bowl of rice, maybe a little teriyaki sauce, soy sauce with that. I think that would be lovely. And just talking about that is actually making me hungry now. And given the state of American democracy and what we're going through, I certainly could use some comfort food.
I was just going to say, speaking for myself, I was going to cite a rice product, not necessarily a food, but inspired by John Gauntner's remarks, I was reminiscing about the 1-cup ozekis that you pick up after a long, hard day at midnight at your convenience store.
Very nice.
Anyway, let's jump right in to the topics that I know are in everyone's minds. We are, as you alluded to, in a period of political transition in both Japan and the United States, and therefore perhaps a transition in the US-Japan alliance. I want to ask first, Sheila, what can the US expect from the new Suga administration? What, if anything, changes with the Abe administration? And then we'll go to Kurt to give us a brief preview of the Biden administration. So Sheila, you go first.
Thank you, Jake. I think we've kind of made the transition in Tokyo. We now have Prime Minister Suga. We've watched him for almost the entire time of Prime Minister Abe's time in office. He has been the chief cabinet secretary. He may have not been the front of the diplomatic face of Japan in the world, but he was certainly there as Abe's right-hand man. So he is a story of continuity. And I think the initial story for Prime Minister Suga obviously was that he would be there as a caretaker to provide continuity between the Abe cabinet and whatever comes next. There's a challenge, and when I talk to folks here in Washington, of course, they worry. You had a long-term Japanese prime minister, Mr. Abe, of course, the longest ever in Japanese modern history, but now there's a little bit of a concern that we're going to go back to the old ways of one prime minister per year, the kaiten sori, right? And I think the longevity question for Mr. Suga is real. There's a lower house election coming up, as you know, between now and sometime next fall. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch Mr. Suga as he manages COVID, the economic challenges, and to see whether he's going to be able to sustain his time in office beyond this caretaker role.
So Kurt, tell us a little about what you expect from the Biden administration, specifically on the US-Japan alliance, and what changes from President Trump, and what, if anything, stays the same.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. And can I just say, I lived through a period in which we had a new prime minister, new foreign minister, almost every several months. And it's difficult to establish momentum and stability in the relationship. And so I'm with Sheila in the hopes that we have at least some degree of continuity in the next little while in Japan. For President-elect Biden, and I would just say, Jake, I would love to describe this period as a transition period in the United States. That's our hope, of course. That's what we expect. But it's really turning out to be a period of contestation, of contest, in which every election result, even though it's absolutely clear to anyone who follows this honestly, Vice President Biden is now President-elect Biden, and he should be allowed to take the necessary steps towards the inevitable transition in January, but it's being contested. So in a number of speeches, in articles, and in the statements of his senior aides, I think you see the outlines of a consistent and clear American strategy in the Asia-Pacific region. And I'll just go through that quickly. I think the first part of it, Jake, and in fact, the most important part of it, is a recognition that we will not be effective internationally unless we can get our act together domestically. And that requires a number of steps. We have to deal with the pandemic in a much more systematic and an effective way. I think it's hard for me to say this, but I think many Asian friends look almost in pity at the United States at how we've handled this, and we've got to reverse that. There's an economic component to try to spur and support the economy and workers and cities and beleaguered states during this transition period as we come out of it. That will be critical as well. But also there are clear domestic divisions that, frankly, if not eased somewhat, I think will blunt American purpose on the international stage. And so I think you can expect the Biden team to focus hard on all these issues. And these cannot be reversed overnight. They will take a substantial amount of time and effort as we go forward. And I think you'll hear discussions about domestic incentives, investments in technology, and a variety of things to allow us to compete more effectively, particularly against China, but to play our role in the Asia-Pacific region. Second will be what I would call just capacity building. I think it's no doubt, and it's, I think, relatively clear, Jake, that we've spent the last 20 years probably overinvested strategically in the Middle East. And we're now in the process that began 10 years ago of shifting our focus more to the Asia-Pacific region. And we're entering a period where Asia will be center, will assume a place of primacy in the formulation and execution of American foreign policy. The interesting thing, this is the first time that has ever been the case. Asia has always, even during Vietnam and during the Second World War, been a secondary theater. It's going to be the dominant theater, creating capacity, language, capability, experience. That will be, I think, a critical component of what President-elect Biden and his team will seek to do. And that will take time, probably not just one, perhaps even a few administrations as we go forward. And it's already begun as well. The third part, Jake, most important to Japan, is that you're going to see a strategy in Asia that focus much more on working closely with friends and allies. And at the top of that list will be Japan, a recognition that if we're to have a successful strategy to engage an increasingly assertive and in some cases aggressive China, we need to work more closely with partners, share views, strategize about how to present united front positions on a host of economic and technology fronts. And Japan will be at a core of that. I think Japan is prepared for that. It's going to mean much more sustained, intense engagement, probably involving intelligence across the board. And so I'm quite hopeful about that. I will say, I think the challenges will be, as the United States, Jake, approaches allies and friends, we're going to have to do it with some degree of humility. We're going to have to listen. Listening has never been a particularly strong suit for Americans. Hopefully we'll have the diplomats that will be able to do that carefully, and we'll have to respond to much of what we've heard, and they'll want a comprehensive strategy on a range of issues, including trade. And then lastly, I would expect that you will see some continuity in U.S. policy towards China. It's not going to be no holds barred, brutal competition of the kind that President Trump and his team are currently advocating. But the watchword of the relationship will be competition, hopefully more stable. But you'll see that across the board on contested spaces in the South China Sea. You're going to see it in technology. And at the same time, I think probably the vice president and his team recognize there still are going to be issues that are existential, like climate change, the tail end of the pandemic, proliferation, that require, really demand a degree of coordination between the United States and China. So those are tall orders, and that's just the beginning. There will be other areas, rejoining organizations, more focus on multilateralism, some minilateralism, the Quad and the like. And so it's going to be challenging, very deep, sustained engagement, and it will be important to find willing partners. I'm very hopeful about the relationship between the United States and Japan in the period ahead.
Great. Well, thank you both for helping set that scene. Kurt, you raised a lot of things, both of you did, that I want to follow up on, but one in particular, which you alluded to, was sort of the difficulty of this transition. And in fact, I wanted to bring to the attention of this audience, if they were not aware, that in addition to being an Asia expert, Kurt presciently wrote a book with Jim Steinberg in 2008 with the title Difficult Transitions, about the crises that can pop up even during the smoothest and most amicable transitions between two administrations. Can you just briefly give us some of the horror stories, I guess, that you recounted in that book? What's gone wrong before, and what do you think is a particularly heightened risk now, given, as you say, the potentially unprecedented tensions between the two administrations?
Jake, thank you for the question. And I will point out that my sales went up the other day by 100% because Jake bought one book. So I'm
charging that to the Japan American
Society. Very pleased with that. Thank you, Jake. So look, as I looked at the book the other day, I will simply say most of the case studies in it, like the issues associated with Iran, whether to keep holdovers, seem positively quaint in comparison to what we're dealing with now. So I have to say that we're in completely uncharted water. Transitions in many respects requires a degree of, we don't use the term gentlemen's agreements any longer, but this understanding between the winners and the vanquished. And President Trump and his team and most of the Republican Party are not interested in playing that game anymore, or to basically exercise some of the most basic elements of the democratic process. And so, the president-elect is not getting intelligence briefings. No one is referring to him as president. They are contesting some of the basic components of the vote in Michigan and Pennsylvania. We just heard today that they're challenging the vote in Nevada. I would simply report to Japanese friends, President Trump, when he won in 2016 by much smaller margins than Vice President Biden did, he called it a landslide and historic win, and then Secretary Clinton very quickly conceded on election night. We're seeing none of that now. A real resistance to accepting any element of the election. Now, I think there is a belief among some that this will play itself out in the next couple of days. I certainly hope that, Jake. That's my hope. But I find with every passing day, it doesn't feel like it's passing. It feels like it's building towards really an attempt to upend or disavow an election. And I'm just left, one of my daughters loves, kind of new age punk and rock. And one of her favorite songs is by a London band. And the line in the song is, "I brought a lemon to a knife fight." And that's what it feels like a little bit. We're kind of on the Democratic side waiting for this process to kick in. And the president and his minions are busy salting the ground and undermining really the core elements of what has made the United States a special nation on a hill for hundreds of years.
Oh, thank you for that. So I want to pause and just note to people in the audience that you can ask questions as well. You go to Hopin, you enter the questions in the chat feature at the right side of your screen, and make sure that you're clicking on the Gala stage chat button, not the event chat. Also include your name and affiliation, and if there's someone you want to answer it or try to answer it, put that in. I also want to note, if you're not aware, that there's a running poll that's going on. Also in Hopin, then the polls tab next to the chat feature, and you can keep voting on that. And that reminds me, we do have a number of poll results coming in. A lot of questions and interest both in RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Plan or Program, I guess it is, that was signed just over the weekend, a 15-nation agreement that includes both Japan and China, but not the United States. And the polling on that seems fairly split among people who consider it either a threat or an opportunity for the U.S. Going with that poll is a question about whether the U.S. will enter the revised TPP, with 22%, at least of the results I'm seeing, saying they expect the U.S. to re-enter, and 36% saying no. And we have a question actually from Frank Januzzi of the Mansfield Foundation, who asks about, now that China has convinced Japan and Korea to join RCEP, what are the implications of that for the U.S., and are there any chances that that makes the U.S. take a fresh look at TPP? Anyone want to take that one on? He didn't name who was supposed to answer it. So.
I'll start and then let Sheila try to develop her defenses so that she can answer that. Look, I've got to say, Jake, that we have to see the RCEP as it's just a substantial challenge to the United States. This is a regional architecture, really designed more in China than any place else. It does link the region more together, and the United States is not part of it. And we have to have a contesting vision to play adequately in the region. So we often think of strategy in Asia as our forward deployed military presence, or our commitment to values, or our role in institutions. But ultimately, our really most important role has been supporting an open, optimistic trade and economic architecture in Asia. And I think Asians will be looking at that, at how we are proposing to proceed. I don't think it's a secret to anyone that in both political parties in the United States, trade is extraordinarily difficult. It's very divisive. But for us to be effective in Asia, we're going to have an answer.
Do you want to weigh in, Sheila, or?
I think that's a succinct answer to the question. I just want to point out one thing, or a couple of things actually, Jake, which are, we need Wendy Cutler here. So Wendy Cutler was who moderated the previous panel between Ambassador Kennedy and Governor Koike. Of course, was the really effective creator of the Japanese American leadership of TPP. I will say that we had two bookends as we thought about trade in the region, and I'm taking this from a more political point of view than a trade, expert's point of view. But one was the high standards approach of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and this would incorporate labor standards, environmental standards. It was all about countries that had developed had developed the capacity domestically to produce or to promote trade liberalization based on those norms, right? And this is exactly the remedy that was given to the U.S. Relationship with Canada and Mexico on trade. The upgrade, right, of the NAFTA now incorporates many of the building blocks that were TPP. Personally, I think absolutely the United States should be at that table, and we led that table with Japan and others in the region. We should certainly be at that table today. I think it's difficult given our domestic politics, and I'll just leave it at that. But the RCEP was never something the United States was engaged in. And I think it's important for our audience to remember that this is not something the United States was at the table at, or that the United States had an appetite for. The United States was much, much more interested in pushing forward a much more high standards trade multilateral vision for Asia. And I think that's where we belong. That's where we ought to be. But I think that Kurt is absolutely right in pointing out that the completion of RCEP, which is tremendous, but it's varied in terms of the kinds of economies that are participating. The scope and scale is nowhere near as ambitious as the TPP. I wouldn't say we ought to be at that table. That's not our table. But we have left the other table, and that's the problem. We are not at the idea generation piece of trade policy in the Asia Pacific or the Trans-Pacific conception. And I think that's a problem for us, because that's where our industries and various sectors of the American economy will benefit from our participation and, in fact, our leadership. So I think we ought to be back at the table where we belong. I don't think RCEP is for us to battle over, but we should recognize that we are no longer at either table, neither at the CPTPP, as it is now called, nor at the RCEP. And therefore, we have ceded ground to China. We have ceded ground that is an American interest for us to pursue. And I think that's a huge setback for the United States. And as other partners in Asia look at us, I think many of our partners, be it Japan or Australia or others, are scratching their heads wondering, well, where are you? And are you coming back at all?
So Sheila, let me follow up on that and
sure.
Sort of maybe blend a couple of things. One that that Kurt had mentioned about, the agenda of the Biden administration is to re-engage, to work more closely with allies. But also, people are looking at us and saying, is Biden really going to become president? What is the stability of American domestic politics? Or as Kurt said, the priority is getting your act together at home, and trade remains a fraught issue. Sheila, you wrote an interesting piece for the Australian Financial Review where you said, and I'm quoting from it, it'll take more than one election to settle the deep U.S. domestic divisions, and the distracted U.S. may be Asia's lot. You separately, sent along in preparation for this an interesting piece quoting Takeshi Ninami, head of Suntory and a well-known business leader, saying, I believe it's inevitable that the U.S. global leadership will wither in the long term. So talk a little bit about that function where you have an administration that has a certain agenda and a desire to carry that out, and yet, people looking at the domestic politics and wondering whether any president can do that, or whether Biden is himself a one-term president to be followed by a Trump again or another Trump-like figure.
Wow, Jake, thank you for that. So thank you. Thank you for referencing the Australia Financial Times. That was actually originally a piece for the East Asia Forum of ANU, Australia National University, that got picked up by the Financial Times, and it was prior to our election results being known. I think the challenge for us going forward, be it in trade, and I would say the caveat here, and Kurt, please correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but the caveat is trade has always been divided in the United States. We have never had a consensus on trade. And I think it's partly functional to our Congress, which is where we decide whether we belong or don't belong to trade agreements. It's also the piece of the puzzle is the sectoral imbalance between which sectors of our economy benefit from a global exposure and which sectors of our economy ask for more protection from global exposure. So I wouldn't say we've ever had a consensus on trade. It's nasty, it's brutal, it's regional, it's sectoral, right? It's a fight, and it should be a fight because it represents the people of the United States. That being said, there are times when we have had a vision in which we can promote trade liberalization globally, and we have institutionally in the WTO and in other places. So we can get there again if we think it's in our interest. And that's the real question that needs to be answered here, whether it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration or whoever comes next. We have to come back to the basic question of, does this benefit the American people? And I think there's a serious conversation to be had here about whether or not there are benefits to be had. And I think that's a good question to ask.
In a way that gets to what Kurt had been saying earlier about, the priority, in some ways, the foreign policy priority is getting your domestic house.
All trade agreements are good. We should find, but we need to get to the balance where we have the support of the American people, or the majority of the American people, that trade agreements, and especially multilateral.
So,
Can
I have a second?
Can I just finish one thought though, just
Yeah.
before, because this is the question about the piece that I wrote, which is really getting back to, Kurt, where you began, which is, this election will not resolve the Trump versus Biden or the Republican versus Democrats question about our engagement writ large, whether it's trade or whether it's strategic, right, in terms of our alliances, et cetera. My personal sense is we are going to have several elections at least ahead of us here, where we are going to be contesting and questioning some of the questions that were raised very abruptly, perhaps for some of us, but very to the point by the Trump administration. And I think it's the duty of many of us who feel that our alliances are serving American interest to make the case to the American people. But I do think this is not over yet. I think this is a longer term questioning and debate inside the United States. And I think our allies should be ready to support, right, and to encourage that debate, but to also be ready to answer some of the questions about why it's in American interest to pursue our global role and engagement.
Can I, Jake?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I really like what Sheila said. I just add a few things. So just as there's really never been a consensus about trade, that's not the only thing. I would say on many occasions over the last 40 years, we've gone through periods in which Asians in particular thought that the United States was in the process of a hurtling decline. We had it during the Korean War, very acute during the Vietnam War. At the end of the Cold War, there was a real view that both the United States and the Soviet Union lost and Japan won. During the Asian financial crisis in the 1990s, and then during the global financial crisis in 2009, 2010, and more recently with the coronavirus and elements of domestic debates and a degree of disunity, if we will. In those previous cases, each time, despite really profound current concerns and hopes in some capitals, by the way, that the United States, that the period of American sort of Pax Americana, where the United States supporting this operating system and our commitment to a certain kind of leadership was waning and waning rapidly. Each time we managed to basically challenge that conventional wisdom, find something inside us to recommit, to reinvent, to charge forward with either demonstration of economic prowess in Silicon Valley or military might in the Gulf War or putting a person on the moon. Each time we managed through a combination of things to demonstrate the survivability and the durability of American power. And what's interesting is the stubborn nature of the belief in American decline in Asia. It's just a fast, and we have to accept that. And I believe that I agree with Sheila, it's going to take some time, but I have every confidence that we're going to be able to do it again. And in fact, what will help us is the specter of a challenger on the horizon in China, which will drive consensus and support for investment and innovation in the United States. We have to channel that carefully, but that's going to be the case. I actually see another risk, Jake, and I'll conclude with this. It's natural if you win an election, particularly against someone who is for completely, kind of rechanneling or questioning every dimension of American power, to feel good about things. And I think it's natural. The Biden team, against all odds, won this election, and they won it fair and square. I think the hope would be among some that in their initial interactions with friends, there would be gratitude and thank God you're back, and we're gonna work closely together. I don't think that's the way it's going to go. I think there might be a little bit of that, but I think we're going to get a lot of criticism, a lot of, you got to prove it to us that you're back, and we don't trust you, and our politics have changed, and you've let us down. And it's going to be hard to hear, frankly. it's going to be hard to hear.
So let me keying up that. So we're getting I should say we're getting flooded with an all-star cast of questions. So I don't know if Happen allows for a Niji.
We're trying. If you can't tell, Jake, Sheila and I are trying to run off the clock.
My job is to cut you off.
We've only got 15 more minutes to go, and if I filibuster a little bit more, we can get through these.
Everybody who's anybody is weighing in here. So I was going to say, if Happen has a Niji Kai, we can continue afterwards. We're not going to have time to get all these in, but for both of you, from Matt Goodman at CSIS, he says, for Sheila, why do many, so this is picking up on what you said, Kurt, that we're not going to get, that U.S. is not going to get a hero's welcome. They're not going to welcome Biden with open arms. So for Sheila, why do many Japanese officials seem to think, despite historical evidence, that's Matt's comment, Republican administrations are better for Japan than Democratic ones? And for Kurt, what can President Biden do to reassure people in Japan that that is not true?
Oh, Matt. It's a great question. It's a frustration, I think, in some ways. And I've had so many conversations with Japanese, both foreign policy practitioners and politicians, as well as academics, who continue to say, yes, well, Democrats are wobbly, right, on threat. And it's just not empirically true. And I point out the Nixon shocks. And then I point out some other obvious empirical highlights of, where the Republicans did things that Japanese leaders didn't like. Here's the challenge, I think, for the Biden administration, or President-elect Biden and his team coming in. Lots of Japanese questions to me, and I'm sure, Kurt, you've gotten them as well. The Biden administration is going to engage with China, and that's going to result in a trade-off with security cooperation in the alliance. It's just not true. It's just not possible. And I think one is the rhetoric. I think the Biden administration, the President-elect Biden's incoming team, wants to restore alliances, wants to build coalitions, again, to go back to the process that, Kurt, you and others in the Obama administration were so successful at in Asia. And I think, but I think there's a jump there in logic. And again, this is Matt, I'm sure, is hearing this as well. And that is that we're looking backwards. We're looking backwards to the way it used to be. And I think that's just not true. I think this team, at least to the extent that I know who's on the Biden team and who may be leading the Biden foreign policy and security team, they understand the consequences of the last 4 years. They understand that it's not all about what happened here in the United States or the Trump administration's policy choices. It's really about the acceleration of the strategic competition in Asia. And they understand in a very sophisticated way that China is pulling out the stops in terms of accelerating the strategic competition with us and saying, we are in the region, we are powerful, we want to make this about you and us, i.e. Japan and China, Australia and China, India and China, and the United States as a has-been. So partly feeding this new phase or new era, I think, Kurt, as you pointed out, of American declinism, the Chinese have used that rhetoric well. They've tried to turn it to their advantage, but I think they're largely overextended, and I think they're inviting actually pushback from many American allies and partners as well. And I think you just have to look at the situation with Australia at the moment to realize that the Chinese are bringing instruments to the game, or to the fight, as you might say, that are really redounding not to their benefit over the long haul. But Jake, just to try to wrap up on Matt's question, I think there's a worry in Japan, and it's a worry that it's not properly assigned to the Democrats coming in, but there's a worry about the alliance. And there's a worry, it's the reverse of what we would say about the challenges ahead for the US-Japan coordinating our strategy on China. Japan is on the front line geographically. The risk of China's increasing military capabilities is felt keenly, not only by Japan, but the Philippines and the other First Island chain nations, people in the countries and societies in proximity to China. China is also using economic instruments of coercion and retaliation in ways that have not been seen as overtly use this kind of economic instruments overtly used as they have been in the past. And so they're wanting us to engage, but they're wanting us to engage in a sophisticated way. And so there's an ambivalence here about whether the Americans can handle the assignment, Democrats or Republicans. They like the tough talk, but what I would say, Tokyo and others, I hope in your chat will push back here on me. But I think what Tokyo wants is clarity of where there's common purpose and where we're going to be steady as we put more risk on our allies, because it's going to come, right? It's a regional challenge. And I think we're going to have to be very steady state. And the Biden administration is going to have all hands on deck in Asia. It can't be alliances first, and then let's see what happens. It has to be all hands on deck. And I think that's a high sell. It's a hard game. And I think we're going to have to play it. And I know that Kurt and others have done it in the past. And I hope that we'll see in the Biden team people who are ready for it going forward.
Kurt, what say you?
Yeah, it's lovely to be relegated to the past, and I really.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean it that way.
I'm just joking. I love. It feels really good over. It's like
difficult transitions here.
A little aperitif after dinner, just to like back then in the 1800s, Kurt, when you worked. Let me just
comfort
say.
aperitif.
I know, it's comfort food. Yeah. So I have a little blanket over my knees and everything here. So I would just say that I have never been more optimistic about the strategic environment in which the U.S.-Japan relationship operates. I think has never been more positive. I would just say that for right now. And so I'm quite confident that the leadership in both countries, the public support is there to take the relationship to the next stage. And I think both of us recognize fundamentally that we need each other and that there is a strategic rationale. So I'm quite confident about that. And I recognize it, and I believe that that is the case. The second point is, I try not to focus too much on whether Japanese officials like Democrats or like me. I just try to focus on the job at hand. And I look back over 25 years and I feel pretty good about a commitment to a country that I care about deeply, an alliance that I think is fundamental to American purpose. I will say that I think many of the assessments about the United States in senior echelons of power in Japan were formed at a time in which the Democratic Party had two dominant experiences. One, deep divisions over Vietnam and about American purpose generally. And secondly, many of the people in the 1990s in the executive branch cut their teeth on Capitol Hill in the period before that, Jake. And many of those people were part of legislative delegations that saw Japan or Japanese industry hollow out, at least from their perspective, elements of the Midwest. And so their general approach during that period was more wary of Japan, where Republicans tended to be serious about security and trade more generally. Now, I completely agree with Sheila. So much has changed in American politics. If you ask me fundamentally what Republicans stand for right now, I'm not really, I know what my old friends in the Republican Party, but the modern Republican Party, I mean, we're probably going to hear from President Trump in the next couple of days about pulling U.S. forces out of various countries around the world, perhaps even South Korea. That's not something that a Republican does, right? Is it really? So I think that there's going to be a more realignment of purpose. And the modern Democratic Party, folks that have come up in the 80s, 90s that are going to take positions of authority are hard-headed people with deep commitment to allies and American strategic purpose. The leading candidate for Secretary of Defense, Michelle Flournoy, a deep, long-standing friendship with Japan. So I reject a lot of that, and I think it's based on wisdom. I do want to say one last thing, though, Jake. There's a tendency when governments come into power to reject everything that the previous administration did. Certainly, that's what President Trump. If President Obama breathed oxygen, then we'd want to do something different. They want to completely go in a different direction across the board. I think we have to watch and study carefully elements of Trumpism. And there's one thing that I think is important and we should keep in mind. I did like the way President Trump interacted in a leisurely, friendly style with Japanese and other Asian leaders. I understand the conversations were not always comfortable. Trump would say unusual things about Pearl Harbor and the like, but he treated Prime Minister Abe with deep respect. He got to know him. They golfed together. They had leisure time. President-elect Biden has a lot of similar kind of avuncular, friendly qualities. And my hope will be that some of our diplomacy in Asia carries forward some elements of that informal, friendly, we're together atmosphere that President Trump exhibited in some of his interaction with Asian friends, including Prime Minister Abe.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to pivot to a separate topic. Kurt, you had alluded to this in one of your answers earlier, which was climate change. And we've gotten a couple questions on that. One from Emma Chanlett Avery, the Congressional Research Service, asks that Japan, sorry, let me scroll up there. Japan largely got a pass on its climate policy, specifically its coal policy, under the Trump administration. Is Japan prepared to change its approach and work with the U.S. on climate issues internationally, given the emphasis that President-elect Biden has put on that? And then supplementing that from my old friend and neighbor, Hisano-san of Mitsubishi Heavy, if the Biden administration seeks to promote climate change-related agenda as a first priority, does the Biden administration, does that make efforts more closely with Europe than with the Indo-Pacific? So whichever of you wants to pick those up.
I'll just start just quickly. Look, I think there is, when Vice President Biden and his team talk about regard for science and a recognition of the realities of science, I think they come to play primarily in two arenas. One is around the pandemic and the need to address this clearly and to understand that masks are not some horrible challenge to some constitutional right, but just a simple way to prevent the spread of a very dangerous disease. I think the second arena is in climate change, and I think there is a broad recognition within the American public now that the indications of climate change are happening much more rapidly, and the worst case scenarios are coming into relief much more quickly, Jake, than anyone would have anticipated. And we have a very short period of time to address those issues more generally. And they cannot be addressed simply with a dialogue between the United States and Europe. It must involve the chief fundamental emitters in the Asia-Pacific region. And that includes particularly China, but also India, and Indonesia for a number of other reasons, and a few other countries in Asia. Japan did get a pass, but it doesn't pose the same climate challenge per se that other big emitters do. I do believe President Biden will seek to advance a number of steps, some of which he'll have to do through executive order unless he wins back the Senate. But my hope will be that there will be a gathering urgency on the international stage that just simply because of the realities of what we are facing, I mean, it's hard not to look at, the crack in the Arctic ice sheets. I mean, if you look at just some of the basic issues, Jake, if this process continues, then we'll be looking at, tens of feet of increase in seawater with just unbelievable consequences globally. So this is a manifest issue that we're going to have to address. In the past, we have had Japanese leadership on this, and the hope is we will have it again. But it is an issue that the only way that we're going to get more Chinese engagement, honest Chinese engagement, not just rhetorical and, kind of on paper agreements, but true steps to move away from extraordinary, dangerous reliance on coal and the like. The only way to do that is a degree of common purpose among Asian and European allies. And so one of the big challenges, and Sheila talked about this, is we are going to work with allies, but in the past we've worked with them in separate regional settings. The key for the United States is going to be to integrate more those alliance interactions between Europe and Asia about issues of common purpose, like confronting elements of China's assertiveness, working together on common problems like solving the pandemic and dealing with climate change in a more urgent fashion.
So I should say, Sheila, we've got like 1.5 to 2 minutes left. If you want to close us out.
Absolutely. So I think I think Kurt's really put his finger on it. What we need to see America do is re-engage in global problem solving. And these are the problems, as Kurt pointed out, this is both climate change, which your questioners were asking you about, Jake, but also the pandemic. How do we deal with problems that single countries, even the United States, which is the most powerful country in the world, can't deal with alone? And so I think there's great expectation that a Biden administration will lead us back to a situation in which we will engage on these problems, led by science, led in a coalition of like-minded partners, in Japan first and foremost. And this is the way in which we will be able to deal with China and China's position on some of these issues, which may not always align itself with us. And so I think what we want to do here in the United States and Japan really need to think about an agenda going forward that is not just global issue, a zero-sum sort of approach that global engagement on climate change with China means compromise on regional security issues, which is the way in which some of my Japanese colleagues and friends have posed to me. But there's a tier of issues in which the Japanese-American relationship can really make a difference, can really be catalytic. And that is pandemic. I hope the next administration will get us right back into the WHO, not because it's perfect, but because without us there, we cede ground to a country that may be increasingly willing to push the WHO in directions that we are uncomfortable with. So Japan and the United States are catalytic in so many ways that engage, as Kurt pointed out, science, technology, but also these larger kind of collective goods, if you will, that will really either save our planet or get in the way of saving our planet. And I think the time is now for Tokyo and Washington to really sort of align themselves on where we ought to be. Again, all of us watched the launch to the space station the other day, the first private launch, in which there was a Japanese astronaut, right? There's so much in which the Japanese and American scientists and leaders and global activists need to get together and remember that this is not just a partnership that is about you and me, about Japan, the United States, but is really about being a catalytic agent for a future for the globe that is so much more positive than what we fear it might be without our engagement.
Well, thank you for that. That was the perfect ending. And I don't know about the audience, but I found this to be great comfort food all around. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but there were a lot of questions that I think people would love to ask, probably one-on-one or later. So thank both of you. And Ryan, back over to you.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, Jake Schlesinger, Dr. Smith, Dr. Campbell. I deeply appreciate all that you do for Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. Thanks to the audience for your great questions. I turn now to somebody known to virtually all of our attendees tonight, my senpai, Ambassador John Malott. Ambassador Malott has played truly a critical role in shaping the fabric of US-Japan cultural ties in the National Capital Region, from our society, where he served for 8 years as president and CEO, to the National Cherry Blossom Festival, and to a range of partners in Japanese language education throughout our region. Ambassador Malott, thank you for the important role that you have played and continue to play, and thank you for presenting the John and Hiroko Malott Leadership Awards in your names. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for your introduction. Our Japan America Society has always had a very strong interest in reaching out to the next generation. Over the years, our programs such as Japan in a Suitcase and the National Japan Bowl have reached tens of thousands of young people. This leadership award is presented by the Board of Trustees to an individual or an organization that is making a significant contribution to US-Japan relations, thanks to their effort to increase mutual understanding and cooperation between the next generation of Americans and Japanese. The focus is on the future. This year, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I'm very pleased to present 2 leadership awards. The first award is presented to Globalize DC and its leader, Sally Schwartz. As US-Japan relations grew closer after the war, Japanese language programs expanded across the United States. But here, in the center of the relationship, public high school students in Washington, D.C. had no opportunity to study Japanese until 4 years ago. Now that's changed thanks to Globalize DC. It's a nonprofit organization that works to provide access for DC public school students to global education, foreign language learning, and study abroad opportunities. Under the leadership of Sally Schwartz, Globalize DC recognized the interest that so many young people in Washington have in Japanese culture and their desire to learn Japanese. Sally worked to create the first ever Japanese language course for DC public high school students. That program, which is called Japanese Plus, began in 2016 as an after-hours program for 26 students from across the district, and it continues to flourish. Globalize DC also worked with the US-Japan Council's Tomodachi program, the American Councils for International Education, and the Foreign Ministry's Kakehashi program to send DC students to Japan on educational exchanges 6 times in the past 3 years. Closer to home, the students went out to discover historical and cultural connections between Washington, D.C. and Japan, and they produced this wonderful little book called Japan in D.C., which was published with the great assistance of our friends at the United States Japan Foundation. And now, thanks to the efforts of Globalize DC, a Washington, D.C. public high school, Bell Multicultural in Columbia Heights, now has a full-time Japanese language program. It's the very first public high school program in DC, and its enrollment has grown to 65 students in just 2 years. The Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. is honored to recognize Globalize DC and its leader, Sally Schwartz, for their work in establishing the first Japanese language program for Washington public high school students, and for their other activities that have supported DC students in their desire to learn about Japan. We extend our congratulations and best wishes for their continued success. Congratulations, Sally.
Thank you so much. Now, I want you to see this wonderful award. Thank you so much, Ambassador Malott, for this award and for your very kind words. And thanks also to Ryan Shaffer, Ambassador Zumwalt, and everyone involved at the Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. for this very special recognition. You know, there are so many young people growing up here in DC in the public schools who are really fascinated with Japan and the Japanese language, even though most of them have never actually met a Japanese person in real life. There aren't easy ways for most of them to connect with or even know about this incredible US-Japan community that's here tonight, or the resources that exist right here in their own city. Most of our Japan work is about connecting students to people and experiences that can inspire them, help them pursue their interest in Japan, and ultimately transform their lives. We cannot do this work without partners, and the Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. has been a critical partner from the very beginning. We love, love, love the Sakura Matsuri and the Japan Bowl. We love to participate in that and your other activities. You honor our students by honoring this work. Our beloved Japanese teacher, Yoko Eshita, who's here this evening, and it is her birthday today. I didn't realize that. We both want to thank you so much, and we look forward to many years of partnership to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally, and happy birthday to Eshita Sensei. The second award is presented to Dr. Sherry Martin of the United States Department of State. The United States and Japan are two great democracies, something that we here in the United States clearly reaffirmed this month with the largest and most enthusiastic voter turnout in history. And because we're democracies, we know that public attitudes and popular opinion have an important impact on our relations with each other. It's not just what the so-called elites think. Sometimes in Washington, D.C., we forget that. We think of our relationship as just government to government. But the truth is, our relationship expands across many areas that involve the citizens of our two nations. And there are 450 million of us in our two countries, in the United States and Japan. A relationship that covers economics and business, education and culture, science and technology, and an area that is very close to the heart of the Japan-America Society. And that actually was the reason for our creation, which is people-to-people relations. Dr. Sherry Martin is an expert in US-Japan public opinion. She believes strongly that the future of our relationship depends on what people, and especially young people in both countries, believe. She also believes that each generation needs to learn and understand anew, as she did, and indeed as we all did, how important our two countries are to each other. Sherry believes that the future of our relationship requires us to monitor and analyze public opinion very carefully, especially among younger people. That has been Sherry's focus as an academic and now in government service. Sherry also has a special interest in the opinions of Japanese women and the influence or lack thereof that they have on Japanese politics and policy. The role of women in today's Japan was a special concern for Hiroko, as it is for me today. Therefore, the Japan-America Society is honored to recognize and present this leadership award to Dr. Sherry Martin, with our expectation that she will continue to make an important contribution to the future of our relationship for years to come. Congratulations, Sherry.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate those kind words. I am deeply honored and humbled to be a recipient of this award. I want to offer my deepest appreciation to you, Ambassador Malott, the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., and the members of the selection committee. I also want to thank the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation for inspiring me to make this transition from academia to public life, to gain a new perspective on the US-Japan relationship. And finally, I want to say thank you to my US Department of State colleagues whose work I've had the privilege of supporting. Receiving this award means so much to me at this particular juncture in my career, and it really does inspire me to continue, along this path. Ganbarimasu. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Sherry. And again, on behalf of the Society, congratulations to both of you. With that, let me turn to a very special guest who has asked to send a greeting from Tokyo.
Thank you, Ambassador Malott, and hello to the 2020 US-Japan Capital Gala. I am Koichi Wakata, astronaut of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. I would like to add my congratulations to Sherry Martin of the US Department of State and to Sally Schwartz and Globalize DC students for receiving the John and Hiroko Malott Leadership Awards. People like you are critical to the future of the US-Japan relationship, and therefore, I wish you the greatest of success in the years ahead.
Wakata-san, thank you so much. That was amazing. And Ambassador Malott, thanks for the very thoughtful presentation. Dr. Martin and Sally Schwartz, we're so honored to be able to recognize you, and our community is really lucky to have you both. So congratulations to you again. Folks, the 2020 Gala is just about finished. In a moment, I have the pleasure of welcoming our recent former United States ambassador to Japan, now Senator-elect Bill Hagerty. He'll provide the closing toast. But before I do, let me remind you that you're all welcome to remain in the gala after the gala concludes. The auction will conclude at 9:30, but the gala platform itself will remain open until 10. So let me direct your attention once again to the auction. Don't let somebody sneak in and grab the Toto washlet or the Air Canada tickets from under you. And know, of course, that your proceeds or the proceeds from the auction go directly to support the National Japan Bowl, our Japanese language school, the Sakura Matsuri Japanese Street Festival, and our many other hundreds of programs throughout the year. Before I cede the floor, let me also take a moment to acknowledge our trustees, our corporate members, our sponsors for their support and patience as we have endeavored to invent this virtual gala more or less on the fly. And thank you all as well for adapting to this new digital platform and for your good humor and understanding as we encounter the inevitable technical bumps that accompany an event like this. It's also very important to me to thank and recognize the director and mastermind behind tonight's event, Miss Olivia Kent, who's done such a brilliant job with this gala. And thanks also to our staff, Yuriko Smith, Nancy Marsden, Mari Fromell, Colette Fazard, and our team of brilliant interns, Ryan, Alice, Elise, May, Shayla, Max, and Kiyomi. Now, in the fall of 2017, in my previous role with the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation, one of tonight's sponsors, we had the honor of organizing a reception for then outgoing Ambassador Bill Hagerty to celebrate his confirmation as U.S. Ambassador to Japan. So it's particularly meaningful to have the privilege again of welcoming Bill Hagerty in Washington, this time as Senator-elect. The list of Americans who served as both United States Senator and Ambassador to Japan is very short and extraordinarily distinguished. The first person on that list that many of us think of is Mike Mansfield, who served not only as our longest serving ambassador to Japan, but also our longest serving Senate Majority Leader. But the others on the list are none other than Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker and Vice President Walter Mondale. I suspect that history will show that it's not an accident that Mr. Hagerty finds himself on that elite list. And there's one more important distinguishing feature of Mr. Hagerty on that list, and that is he will be the first American to come to the United States Senate after having served as ambassador to Japan. Serving as ambassador, Mr. Hagerty proved himself one of our foremost leaders committed to strengthening the US-Japan relationship. He presided over an important and complex period in the bilateral relationship, and he left office having helped to nurture and sustain a warm relationship between our president and then Prime Minister Abe, and played a critical leadership role in the alignment of the United States and Japan as leaders in an emerging Indo-Pacific strategic framework. So, as we wrap up this year's US-Japan Capital Dinner, an event that serves as an opportunity to celebrate this critically important relationship, it's both fitting and reassuring to close the evening with somebody who will bring to the Senate this expertise, insight, and commitment to the United States partnership with Japan. I'm pleased to now turn to United States Senator-elect from Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, to offer a closing toast for the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C.'s 34th Annual US-Japan Capital Gala.
Hello, I'm Bill Hagerty. I want to thank all of you for participating in the Japan-America Society of Washington's annual gala. I particularly want to commend the Society for putting together this virtual gala under very trying circumstances. In particular, I'd like to recognize its chairman, Ambassador Jim Zumwalt, and its president, Ryan Shaffer. Thank you for your leadership. I also want to recognize Ambassador Sugiyama. Ambassador, you've been a longtime friend and you do a wonderful job representing Japan to the United States. I look forward to continuing to working together with you. And to all of you on this call, thank you for supporting the most critical strategic alliance in the world, the alliance between Japan and the United States. Indeed, the US-Japan alliance is the cornerstone of peace and prosperity in the largest and most fastest growing region in the world. Thank you for all you do to continue supporting this relationship. To all of you, please join me, raising a toast to the US-Japan relationship. Kenpai.
We would like to thank all our sponsors for the 34th Annual US-Japan Capital Gala.
S&R Foundation.
AFLAC.
Astellas.
Mitsubishi Corporation America.
Mitsubishi Heavy Industries.
Daikin.
MUFG Bank.
The Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation.
McLarty Associates.
Mitsui & Co. USA.
Sumitomo Corporation.
Toyota Motor North America.
The Asia Group.
Hitachi.
Marubeni America Corporation.
NEC Corporation America.
Toshiba America.
We would also like to especially thank our event partners.
The Embassy of Japan.
Kirin Beer.
Itoen.
Izumibashi Second.
Paul Hersey.
Blue Ocean.
Izakaya Seki. Kanagawa Prefecture.
Katash.
Nakamura International Limousine.
Sanjay.
Sushi Ogawa.
Sushi Taro.
Tachibana.
Takohachi.
Yuzu.
On behalf of myself and everyone at the Japan America Society of Washington, D.C., thank you for joining us for the 34th Annual US-Japan Capital Gala. Have a great night.